The excavator's engine roared to life at 3 a.m., its massive arm tearing through Karen Henderson's pristine front lawn like a metal beast awakening from hell. Sarah Chen stood in her bathrobe, watching 20 years of neighborhood tyranny about to meet its match. What started as a simple property dispute would become the most spectacular act of revenge their quiet suburb had ever witnessed, and by morning, the entire Henderson family would discover that sometimes, when you demand someone give you everything. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday, until Sarah Chen opened it and watched her world tilt sideways. Notice of easement violation and property encroachment, the bold letters screamed from expensive letterhead. Bearing the logo of Henderson and Associates, the law firm owned by her neighbor's husband. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the legal jargon that essentially boiled down to one impossible demand: tear down her pool and deck within 30 days. Or face a lawsuit that would bankrupt her family. This can't be right, she whispered, sinking onto her kitchen stool. Through the window, she could see the source of 20 years of neighborhood friction, Karen Henderson, standing in her immaculate backyard like a general surveying conquered territory, her platinum blonde hair catching the afternoon sun as she spoke animatedly into her phone. The pool had been Sarah's sanctuary since her husband David died 3 years ago. It was where she taught their daughter Emma to swim, where they'd hosted 4th of July barbecues that brought the whole street together, where she now floated every evening after her double shifts at the hospital, trying to wash away the exhaustion and grief that clung to her like a second skin. The front door slammed, and Emma burst into the kitchen, her nursing scrubs still damp with the chaos of her first year as an ICU nurse. At 24, she'd inherited David's stubborn streak and Sarah's fierce loyalty, a combination that had served her well in the pandemic's aftermath but made her dangerous when cornered. "Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah handed her the letter without a word. Emma's dark eyes, so much like David's, scanned the document, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to a fury that made the air in the kitchen feel electric. "Are they insane?" Emma's voice climbed an octave. "Our pool is completely on our property. I watched Dad measure it twice when we had it installed. It says here that our deck extends 18 inches into an easement that gives them access to the back corner of their lot." Sarah's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. 18 inches, Emma. Less than 2 feet, and they want to destroy everything. Emma's phone was already in her hand, fingers flying across the screen. "I'm looking up property records right now." "This is ridiculous," she stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale. "Mom. When did Dad install the pool?" "You know when." "Right. After you started high school." 2019. "And when did the Hendersons buy their house?" Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. 2021, right before the market went crazy. She paused, understanding beginning to dawn. "Emma, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Karen Henderson is about to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong family." Emma's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Because according to these records, that easement she's claiming, it was created in 1987 for utility access. It was never used, never marked, and according to state law, if it goes unused for 20 years, it expires." Sarah felt the first spark of hope she'd experienced since opening the letter. "Exactly. And our pool? It's been there for 6 years. Which means we have what's called adverse possession of that land." Emma's grin widened. "But here's the beautiful part, Mom. Karen doesn't know that. She thinks she can bully us with her husband's law firm and scare us into compliance." Sarah looked out the window again. Karen was still on her phone, but now she was gesturing toward the Chen property, her face animated with the kind of righteous indignation that had made her the terror of every homeowners association meeting, PDA gathering, and community event for the past 4 years. Karen Henderson had arrived in Maple Grove like a perfectly manicured hurricane, transforming the quiet neighborhood into a personal kingdom. She'd started small, complaining about Sarah's rose bushes growing too close to the property line, demanding that the Johnsons repaint their fence because the color was too aggressive, organizing petition drives to ban children from playing in the common areas after 6 p.m. But it was the pool that had really set her off. Karen had wanted her own pool, but the lot configuration of her house made it impossible without removing the ancient oak tree that provided shade for half the street. When the city refused her permit, citing the tree's protected status, she'd turned her attention to making sure no one else could enjoy what she couldn't have. She's been planning this, Sarah realized aloud. All those times she's been out there with that measuring tape, all those photos she's been taking. She's been building a case. Well, she picked the wrong family to mess with. Emma was already scrolling through contacts on her phone. Remember my friend Jake from nursing school? The one who became a lawyer instead of staying in medicine. Sarah nodded, remembering the intense young man who dated Emma briefly before they'd both realized they were better as friends. He specializes in property law. And Mom? Emma's eyes glittered with something that would have made David proud. And terrified in equal measure. He really, really hates bullies. 20 minutes later, Jake Morrison was sitting at their kitchen table, his red hair disheveled from the motorcycle ride over, his green eyes bright with the kind of intellectual excitement that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "This is beautiful," he said, spreading the legal documents across the table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. "I mean, it's terrible that they are doing this to you, but from a legal standpoint, this is a textbook case of frivolous litigation combined with a fundamental misunderstanding of property law. Can you stop them?" Sarah asked. "Stop them? Sarah, I can do better than that." Jake leaned back in his chair, his grin matching Emma's for pure predatory satisfaction. "I can make them regret they ever heard your name. See, here's what your neighbors don't understand: when you file a frivolous lawsuit, especially one designed to harass and intimidate, you open yourself up to counterclaims. Harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, abuse of process, the list goes on." "But what about the pool?" Sarah's voice was small. Despite Jake's confidence, the thought of losing her sanctuary made her chest tight with panic. "The pool stays exactly where it is. In fact, by the time I'm done, you're going to own that entire strip of land they are claiming as an easement." Jake's expression grew serious. "But Sarah, I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. The Hendersons aren't going to back down quietly, and Karen Henderson strikes me as the type of person who doubles down when challenged." As if summoned by his words, there was a sharp knock at the front door. Through the frosted glass, Sarah could see the unmistakable silhouette of Karen Henderson, her posture radiating authority and barely contained rage. "Speak of the devil," Emma muttered. Sarah opened the door to find Karen standing on her porch like an avenging angel of suburban justice. She was dressed in her usual armor, cream-colored blazer, pearls, and an expression that could freeze hellfire. Behind her stood her husband Richard, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Sarah," Karen's voice was honey over broken glass. "I trust you received our letter." "I did." Sarah kept her voice level, but she could feel Emma and Jake hovering behind her like protective shields. "Good. Then you understand the situation. That pool of yours has been encroaching on our property rights for years, and we've been far too patient. 30 days should be more than enough time to remove the structure and restore the land to its natural state." Actually, Jake stepped forward, and Sarah saw Karen's eyes narrow as she took in his expensive suit and briefcase. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm Jake Morrison, Mrs. Chen's attorney. And I'm afraid you've been misinformed about both the law and the facts of this case." Richard Henderson's face went pale. "Karen, maybe we should." "Nonsense." Karen's voice could have cut diamonds. "The easement is clearly marked in the original property documents. Anyone with eyes can see that their deck is encroaching." "The easement expired 20 years ago due to non-use," Jake said pleasantly. "And even if it hadn't, Mrs. Chen has established adverse possession of the land through continuous, open, and notorious use for the past 6 years. Your claim has no legal merit." Karen's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of anger that crept up her neck. "That's ridiculous." "Richard, tell them, Karen." Richard's voice was sharp enough to cut through his wife's indignation. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." But Karen was beyond reason, beyond caution, beyond anything except the burning need to prove that she was right and everyone else was wrong. "I don't care what some baby lawyer thinks he knows about property law. That pool is coming down, and if you people think you can intimidate us with legal threats, you're about to learn exactly how wrong you are." She spun on her designer heel and stalked back toward her house, leaving Richard to offer an apologetic shrug before her. The lawsuit arrived on Friday morning, hand-delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed Sarah the thick envelope. Inside, 47 pages of legal documents demanded not only the removal of her pool but $50,000 in damages for diminished property value and aesthetic disruption. Sarah's hands shook as she read the allegations. According to Henderson and Associates, her pool was an eyesore that negatively impacted the character of the neighborhood, her deck was a hazardous structure built in violation of city codes, and her very presence as a homeowner was somehow detrimental to community standards. "They are claiming your rose garden is a nuisance," Jake said, his voice tight with controlled anger as he reviewed the documents at her kitchen table. "Apparently, the bees it attracts constitute a public health hazard." Emma looked up from her own copy, her face flushed with rage. "They are going after Mom's roses. The ones Dad planted for their anniversary. It gets worse." Jake's jaw was clenched so hard Sarah could see the muscle jumping. "They are demanding removal of your garden shed, claiming it violates setback requirements. And they want you to repaint your house because the color, and I quote, clashes with the established aesthetic harmony of the street." Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. The pale yellow paint had been David's choice, selected because it reminded him of their honeymoon cottage in Tuscany. Emma had been conceived in that cottage. The color wasn't just paint, it was memory made manifest, love transformed into something permanent and beautiful. "How is this legal?" Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "It's not," Jake said flatly. "This is what we call a SLAP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to intimidate you into compliance through sheer financial pressure. Richard Henderson knows his wife doesn't have a case, but is betting you can't afford to fight it. Can we?" Emma asked, and Sarah heard the fear beneath her daughter's bravado. Jake was quiet for a long moment, calculating. "My retainer alone will be $15,000. If this goes to trial, we're looking at $60,000 to $80,000 in legal fees. And that's if we win quickly." Sarah felt the walls closing in. She'd used most of her savings to pay off David's medical bills. The house was paid for, but her hospital salary barely covered Emma's student loans and basic living expenses. $80,000 might as well have been $8 million. "But," Jake continued, his green eyes glittering with something dangerous, "there's another way to handle this." "What kind of way?" Emma leaned forward. "The kind that makes them regret they ever heard your name." Jake pulled out his laptop and began typing rapidly. "See, Richard Henderson made a crucial mistake. He filed this lawsuit in his wife's name, but he prepared it using his firm's resources. That's a conflict of interest and it opens him up to sanctions from the state bar." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Sanctions? Professional discipline? Fines? Possible suspension of his license? Jake's fingers flew across the keyboard. "But that's just the appetizer. The main course is going to be our countersuit." He turned the laptop toward them, revealing a document titled Complaint for Harassment, Intentional Infliction of Emotional Distress, Abuse of Process and Violations of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. "We are not just going to beat their lawsuit," Jake explained. "We are going to make them pay for filing it. Emotional distress damages, attorney's fees, punitive damages for filing a frivolous suit. By the time I'm done, they'll owe you enough money to build a second pool." Emma's grin was savage. "I love it. When do we file?" "Monday morning. But there's something else we need to discuss." Jake's expression grew serious. "Sarah, this is going to get nasty. Karen Henderson strikes me as the type who doesn't lose gracefully. Are you prepared for what that might mean?" Before Sarah could answer, the doorbell rang. Through the window, she could see Mrs. Patterson from across the street, wringing her hands nervously. "Oh, Sarah, dear," Mrs. Patterson said the moment the door opened. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I felt I should warn you. Karen's been going door to door this morning, telling everyone about your situation." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What has she been saying?" "Well." Mrs. Patterson glanced around nervously, as if Karen might be lurking behind the rose bushes. She's claiming that your pool is going to cause foundation problems for everyone on the street. And she's saying that if people don't support her lawsuit, their property values will plummet. That's complete nonsense, Emma said hotly. Of course it is, dear. But she's very convincing, and she's got that official-looking paperwork. Mrs. Patterson's voice dropped to a whisper. She's also telling people that you've been stealing water from the city system to fill your pool, and that the health department is going to shut down the whole street if something isn't done. Jake muttered something under his breath that would have made a sailor blush. There's more, Mrs. Patterson continued reluctantly. She's organized a petition to have you cited for code violations. She's claiming your pool pump is too loud. Your garden shed is an illegal addition, and your fence is 6 inches too high. Sarah felt the world spinning around her. In less than a week, she'd gone from being a respected member of the community to a pariah whose very existence threatened the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson, Jake said carefully, did Karen ask you to sign anything? Well, yes, but I certainly didn't. Good. Because what she's doing constitutes defamation and possibly criminal harassment. Jake's smile was sharp as a knife. Would you be willing to write down exactly what she said to you? After Mrs. Patterson left with a detailed statement and Jake's business card, the three of them sat in Sarah's kitchen, watching Karen hold court in her front yard with a growing crowd of neighbors. She's turning them against me, Sarah said quietly. She's trying to, Emma corrected. But Mom, look closer. Sarah stuttered. The group gathered around Karen. The Hendersons' immediate neighbors, the Kowalskis and the Brennans, stood with their arms crossed and skeptical expressions. Old Mr. Jefferson from the corner house was shaking his head vigorously. The Martinez family, whose kids had learned to swim in Sarah's pool, were notably absent. She's got maybe 6 people out of 30 houses, Emma observed. And half of them look like they are just being polite. Jake was typing on his phone. I'm documenting this. Photos, times, witness statements. Every bit of harassment, every false claim, every attempt at defamation. It's all going into our lawsuit. That evening, as Sarah floated in her pool for what she feared might be the last time, she watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The water was warm against her skin, and she could hear the gentle hum of the filter that David had spent a weekend installing, determined to do it himself despite having no plumbing experience. Hey, stranger. Emma's voice came from the deck, where she'd appeared with 2 glasses of wine and a manila folder thick with documents. What's that? Sarah asked, swimming to the edge. Jake's research on the Hendersons. Emma handed her mother a glass and sat on the pool's edge, dangling her feet in the water. Turns out our neighbors have quite the history. Sarah took a sip of wine and waited. They've been involved in property disputes at their last 3 addresses, Emma continued. Always the same pattern: they move in, find something to complain about, file lawsuits, make everyone miserable until they get what they want or the neighbors cave to their demands. Why aren't they in jail? Because they are smart about it. They never cross the line into criminal behavior, and they always target people who can't afford to fight back. Emma's expression darkened. But here's the interesting part: they've never faced anyone who fought back successfully. Sarah pulled herself out of the pool and wrapped herself in the towel Emma handed her. What do you mean? I mean every single one of their previous targets either moved away or settled out of court. The Hendersons have never actually had to face the consequences of their actions. Emma's smile was predatory. Until now. Emma, what are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time someone taught Karen Henderson that actions have consequences. Emma opened the folder and pulled out a sheaf of papers. Jake found something interesting in the city records. Want to guess what Karen and Richard did within 6 months of moving to every single one of their previous addresses? Sarah studied the documents, noting the pattern. They applied for major renovations. Always the same request: swimming pools, Emma finished. Every single time, they bought a house and immediately applied for a pool permit. And every single time, they were denied for some reason: lot size, setbacks, protected trees, drainage issues. Understanding dawned on Sarah like a cold sunrise. They don't want to live next to a pool. They want to own the only pool. Exactly. This isn't about easements or property rights. This is about Karen Henderson's pathological need to be the only person in the neighborhood with something special. Emma's voice was hard as steel. She can't have a pool, so no one can have a pool. But our pool has been here for years. She knew about it when they bought the house. Of course she did. That's why she bought this house. Emma pulled out another document, the Hendersons' real estate listing from 2021. Look at the photos the realtor took of their backyard. Sarah studied the images, noting the pristine landscaping, the elaborate patio, the E. Jake's office at 7 a.m. on a Saturday was a war room. Documents covered every surface, multiple laptops hummed with research, and empty coffee cups formed small cities across his desk. He looked like he hadn't slept, his red hair sticking up at odd angles and his usually crisp shirt wrinkled from an all-nighter. Tell me you found something good, Emma said, settling into the chair across from his desk while Sarah perched nervously on the edge of another. Better than good. I found the nuclear option. Jake's grin was feral as he turned his laptop toward them. Ladies, meet the reason why Richard Henderson is about to have the worst month of his professional life. The screen showed what appeared to be property records, but Sarah couldn't make sense of the legal jargon and parcel numbers. What am I looking at? The original survey of your neighborhood, conducted in 1987 when the subdivision was platted. Jake's finger traced lines on the screen. See this area here? The one Karen claims as an easement. Sarah nodded, though the technical drawings meant nothing to her. It was never an easement. It was designated as a utility corridor with a 20-year sunset clause. But here's the beautiful part, the utility company never used it. Never ran lines, never installed equipment, never even marked it. Which means under state law, it reverted to the adjacent property owners in 2007. So we own it. Emma leaned forward. You've owned it for 18 years. But that's not the best part. Jake pulled up another document. When Richard Henderson prepared his lawsuit, he cited the 1987 platting documents. But he never bothered to check for updates or amendments. He based his entire legal argument on information that's been invalid for nearly 2 decades. Sarah felt a flutter of hope. Does that mean the lawsuit is frivolous? Frivolous doesn't begin to cover it. This is legal malpractice of the highest order. Richard Henderson is an experienced property attorney who filed a lawsuit without performing basic due diligence. When the state bar sees this, Jake's smile was sharp as winter. Let's just say he's going to have bigger problems than your pool. But wait, Emma said, her expression growing confused. If the information is right there in the public records, how did Richard miss it? Jake's expression darkened. Because he didn't miss it. Look at the filing date on this amendment. He pointed to a stamp in the corner of one document. September 15, 2007. And look at this, the amendment was requested by Henderson and Associates on behalf of a client named Margaret Kowalski. Sarah's breath caught. The Kowalskis lived 2 doors down from the Hendersons. Richard Henderson himself filed the paperwork that invalidated his wife's claim. He knew the easement had expired because he's the one who helped expire it. Jake's voice was deadly quiet. This isn't legal malpractice. This is fraud. The room fell silent except for the hum of the laptops and the distant sound of Saturday morning traffic. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach as the implication sank in. He knew, she whispered. The whole time, he knew their lawsuit was bogus. Worse than that, Emma said, her face pale with understanding. He helped them craft a completely false legal argument, knowing it would cost us tens of thousands of dollars to defend against. Even if we won, would be financially destroyed. Jake nodded grimly. And here's what really makes my blood boil, this isn't the first time. I spent the night digging through court records in every city where the Hendersons have lived. Same pattern, same tactics, same fraudulent easement claims. Richard creates the legal pretense, Karen executes the harassment campaign, and their targets either cave or go bankrupt fighting them. How many families? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. 11 that I can document. Probably more. Jake's jaw was tight with anger. The Hendersons are professional harassers, Sarah. They've been running this scam for 15 years, targeting families who can't afford to fight back. Emma stood abruptly and began pacing. We have to stop them. Not just for us, but for everyone they've hurt. Oh, we're going to stop them, Jake said quietly. But first, we're going to give them exactly what they want. Sarah looked between her daughter and their lawyer, sensing an undercurrent she didn't understand. What do you mean? Jake pulled out a thick folder and spread its contents across his desk. Building permits, contractor estimates, equipment rental agreements, and what appeared to be architectural drawings. Karen wants your pool gone, right? Claims it's an eyesore that diminishes property values and disrupts the character of the neighborhood. Jake's smile was predatory. Well, what if we gave her a neighborhood improvement project that really makes a statement? Sarah studied the documents, her confusion growing. Jake, what exactly are you proposing? Emma and I had a long conversation last night about the best way to handle this situation. We could file our countersuit, drag them through court for months, and maybe win damages. Or, he paused dramatically, we could engage in a little creative compliance with city regulations. Emma's grin matched Jake's for pure malicious joy. Mom, remember when you used to complain that our yard got too muddy every spring because of the drainage issues? Of course, but Sarah stopped, understanding beginning to dawn. Emma, you're not suggesting. Actually, I am. Emma pulled out what appeared to be a city permit application. It turns out there's no law against digging holes on your own property as long as you follow proper procedures for utility clearance and drainage management. Jake leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. Sarah, meet your new backyard improvement project, a comprehensive drainage system designed to prevent water accumulation and soil erosion. Completely legal, properly permitted, and absolutely devastating to anyone who values lawn aesthetics over functional landscaping. Sarah looked at the architectural drawings more carefully. What she'd initially taken for construction plans were actually engineering schematics for an elaborate network of trenches, retention ponds, and drainage channels that would transform her entire backyard into something resembling a construction site. You want me to turn my yard into a swamp? Not a swamp, Emma corrected. A functioning wetland ecosystem designed to manage stormwater runoff. It's actually considered environmentally progressive. The city loves this kind of green infrastructure project. And the best part, Jake added, is that it's all temporary. Once we've dealt with the Henderson problem, we can fill it in and restore your beautiful lawn. But in the meantime, Karen Henderson is going to wake up every morning to a view of the most spectacular mud pit their neighborhood has ever seen, Emma finished. Sarah felt a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep in her chest. You're both completely insane. Insanely brilliant, Jake corrected. Because here's the beauty of this plan, everything we're doing is perfectly legal. We are following all city regulations, obtaining proper permits, and implementing a legitimate environmental improvement project. If Karen complains, she'll look like someone who opposes environmental protection. But won't this hurt my property value? Sarah asked, though she was already beginning to love the idea. Temporarily, yes. But the damage to the Hendersons' property value will be significantly worse, since they are the ones who'll be looking directly at it. Emma's expression grew serious. Mom, this isn't just about revenge. This is about sending a message that people like Karen Henderson can't just destroy families for their own entertainment. Jake gathered the documents and slid them toward Sarah. The permits are already approved. I have contractors standing by. We can break ground Monday morning, right after we file our fraud charges against Richard and our harassment lawsuit against Karen. Sarah stared at the papers, thinking about David and the life they'd built together. He'd been a gentleman, but he'd also been fiercely protective of his family. What would he think of this plan? There's one more thing, Jake said quietly. I've been in contact with attorneys representing 3 other families the Hendersons have targeted. If we can prove fraud in your case, it opens the door for them to file criminal charges in theirs. Criminal charges? Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit theft by deception. We are not just talking about civil lawsuits anymore, Sarah. We are talking about prison time. The weight of that settled over them like a blanket. What had started as a simple property dispute had revealed something much darker, a pattern of predatory behavior that had destroyed lives and families across multiple states. How long do we have to decide? Sarah asked. The contractors need an answer by tomorrow night if we want to start Monday. After that, we lose our window of opportunity. Jake's expression grew gentle. Sarah, I want you to understand, this is going to be ugly. Karen Henderson is going to lose her mind when she sees what we are doing. There's no telling how she'll retaliate. She's already destroyed my peace of mind and dragged my family through hell, Sarah said quietly. What's the worst she can do? That she hasn't already done. Emma reached across and squeezed her mother's hand. Mom, whatever you decide, I'm with you. But I think Dad would want us to fight. Sarah thought about the last 3 years, about floating in her pool every evening and feeling David's presence in the warm water and golden sunlight. She thought about the rose garden he'd planted, the yellow paint he'd chosen, the memories embedded in every corner of their home. The sound that shattered the pre-dawn silence of Maple Grove at 6 a.m. on Monday morning was like nothing the neighborhood had ever experienced. The low rumble of diesel engines mixed with the hydraulic whine of heavy machinery as 3 excavators, 2 dump trucks, and a convoy of construction vehicles rolled down the quiet suburban street like an invading army. Sarah stood in her bathrobe on her front porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the perfectly choreographed chaos unfold in her backyard. Jake had warned her it would be dramatic, but seeing 20 tons of earth-moving equipment lined up on her lawn was surreal. Holy shit, Mom. Emma appeared beside her, still in her scrubs from the night shift. This is really happening. The lead excavator operator, a weathered man named Tommy who'd worked with Jake's family's construction company for decades, approached with a clipboard and a grin that suggested he was thoroughly enjoying himself. Mrs. Chen. Tommy Rodriguez. We are ready to begin your drainage improvement project. Just need your final approval on the scope of work. Sarah looked at the blueprints spread across his clipboard. What had seemed abstract in Jake's office was now terrifyingly real. The plan called for removing her pool, digging a network of trenches throughout the backyard, and creating 3 large retention ponds that would, in theory, manage storm water runoff. In practice, it would turn her yard into something resembling the surface of Mars. The pool has to go. Sarah's voice was smaller than she'd intended. Tommy's expression softened. I know this is hard. But Jake explained the situation, and I want you to know what your neighbors are doing to you isn't right. We are going to take care of this pool properly. Every piece of equipment, every fitting, everything salvageable gets stored in your garage. When this is over, we can reinstall it exactly as it was. Emma squeezed her mother's arm. It's temporary, Mom. Dad's pool isn't gone forever. Sarah nodded, blinking back tears. Okay. Let's do this. Tommy's grin returned. Yes, Boys. You heard the lady. Let's give this neighborhood a drainage system they'll never forget. The first blow of the excavator's arm against the pool's concrete edge rang out like a bell tolling. Across the street, lights began flickering on in windows, as the entire neighborhood worked to the sound of Sarah Chen's revenge. By 6:30 a.m., Karen Henderson was standing in her pajamas on her back porch, her face a mask of disbelief and rage as she watched the systematic destruction of the pool she'd spent months trying to eliminate through legal channels. What the hell is going on over there? She screamed across the fence, but her voice was lost in the roar of machinery. By 7 a.m., a crowd had gathered. Half the neighborhood stood in various states of undress, watching in fascination as Sarah's backyard transformed into an active construction site. The other half were on their phones, presumably calling the city to complain about the noise and disruption. Jake arrived at 7:15, dressed in a spotless suit despite the early hour, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who was about to thoroughly enjoy his day. How's it going? He asked Sarah, who was now dressed and standing with Emma near the command center Tommy had established in her driveway. Karen tried to call the police, Emma reported with barely contained glee. Turns out you can't arrest someone for legally permitted construction work. She also called the city's building department, Sarah added. Twice. And? Jake prompted. They told her to file a formal complaint, which will be reviewed within 30 business days. Emma's grin was savage. Tommy says we'll be done in 10. Jake pulled out his phone and began taking photos of the work in progress. Evidence for our case. The fact that she's trying to interfere with legally permitted work on your property demonstrates a pattern of harassment. A commotion near the fence drew their attention. Karen had emerged from her house fully dressed, her platinum hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, and was marching toward them with the determined stride of someone accustomed to getting her way through sheer force of personality. Behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, followed Richard Henderson in a rumpled suit and the expression of a man who'd just realized his carefully constructed world was collapsing. This is outrageous. Karen's voice carried clearly over the construction noise. You can't just destroy your entire yard out of spite. Sarah stepped forward, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Actually, Karen, I can. It's my property, the work is properly permitted, and I'm addressing a legitimate drainage issue. Drainage issue? Karen's voice climbed an octave. There's no drainage issue. This is pure vindictiveness because we exercised our legal rights. Your legal rights? Jake stepped up beside Sarah, his briefcase in hand. That's interesting, Mrs. Henderson. Perhaps you'd like to explain exactly what legal rights you were exercising when your husband filed a lawsuit based on an easement that expired 18 years ago. The color drained from Richard Henderson's face so quickly that Sarah actually felt a moment of concern for his health. I don't know what you're talking about, Karen said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. Really? Jake opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Because I have documentation showing that your husband personally filed the paperwork in 2007 that expired the very easement he's now claiming gives you rights to Mrs. Chen's property. The construction noise seemed to fade as the implications of Jake's words settled over the group. Richard Henderson opened his mouth, closed it, and then opened it again without making a sound. That's impossible, Karen said, but she was looking at her husband with dawning uncertainty. Richard, tell them that's impossible. Richard Henderson, senior partner at Henderson and Associates, looked like a man watching his career circle the drain. Karen, perhaps we should discuss this privately, no. Karen's voice was sharp as glass. You tell them right now that your lawsuit is legitimate. The silence stretched until it became painful. In the background, Tommy's crew continued their work, the steady rhythm of excavation providing a mechanical counterpoint to the human drama unfolding. Well? Karen's voice was barely controlled. Richard. The easement. Richard's voice came out as a croak. He cleared his throat and tried again. The legal situation is more complex than, oh my God. Karen's face went white, then red, then white again. Oh my God, you lied to me. Karen, it's not that simple, you told me we had legal grounds. You filed papers. You made me look like a fool in front of the entire neighborhood. Karen's voice was climbing toward hysteria. How long have you known? How long have you been lying to me? The neighborhood crowd was growing, drawn by the spectacle of the Hendersons' public meltdown. Sarah saw Mrs. Patterson with her hand over her mouth, the Martinez family watching with undisguised satisfaction, and old Mr. Jefferson shaking his head with disapproval. Since the beginning, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. He's known since the beginning that your lawsuit was fraudulent. Just like he knew in Denver and Portland and Phoenix and every other city where you've run this same scam. Karen Henderson stared at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. What is he talking about? Richard, what is he talking about? But Richard Henderson had nothing left to say. His shoulders sagged as 20 years of lies and manipulations finally caught up with him. Jake pulled out another document. Mrs. Henderson, I'm serving you with a lawsuit for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Your husband is being reported to the State Bar for professional misconduct and will likely face criminal charges for wire fraud and mail fraud. Criminal charges. Karen's voice was barely a whisper. The FBI takes a very dim view of people who use the mail system to commit fraud across state lines, Jake continued relentlessly. As does the IRS. When they discover you've been claiming legal fees as business expenses for fraudulent lawsuits. Karen Henderson, terror of the neighborhood, queen of the homeowners association, and self-appointed guardian of community standards, crumpled onto her perfectly manicured lawn like a deflated balloon. The sound of her sobbing mixed with the rumble of excavators and the whispered conversations of neighbors who were finally seeing the truth about the family that had made their lives miserable for 4 years. Emma put her arm around her mother's shoulders. "You okay, Mom?" Sarah watched the woman who had tried to destroy her family sitting in the dirt, her perfect facade finally shattered, and felt something unexpected, not satisfaction, but a deep, bone-weary sadness. "I think I will be," she said quietly. By noon, the story had spread through social media like wildfire. #DrainageJustice was trending on TikTok, complete with videos of the excavation work and Karen Henderson's public breakdown. Local news crews had arrived, drawn by reports of a neighborhood drainage dispute turned spectacular. But the real victory wasn't the viral videos or the news coverage. It was the parade of neighbors who stopped by throughout the day, some bringing coffee and donuts for the construction crew, others offering to help however they could, all of them apologizing for not standing up to the Hendersons sooner. "We should have supported you from the beginning," Mrs. Patterson said, tears in her eyes as she handed Sarah a casserole. "We all knew what Karen was like, but we were too afraid to